The best conversations don't give you answers. They challenge how you think. I'm your host, Stephanie Chung, and as a keynote speaker and the author of Ally Leadership, I get a rare kind of access to the real conversations with the people worth listening to. And this show is me bringing that access to you. So pull up a chair and let's dive into our next conversation with someone not like me. Welcome back. Let me ask you something that nobody at your job is going to ask you. Do you actually feel like you belong in the role? Now, I'm sure you've worked hard to get where you are, right? You have the title, you have the seat at the table, you may be even in the corner office. And yet there's still a still voice in your back of your head asking whether you actually belong there. Or maybe you're showing up every single day as a slightly edited version of yourself because the culture around you does not feel safe enough for the real one. So if any one of those things is true, today's conversation is for you. Because my guest today is Ebony Russ. She's an HR expert, a consultant, an author with years of experience inside some of the most recognizable organizations in the country. And she is set on both sides of the table as a person navigating corporate culture and as an HR professional who understands exactly how that culture is built and maintained. And she has wrote a book about it. Literally, her book is called Tea, Tactics, and Tenacity, 10 Tips to Thrive in Corporate America. Ebony, I am glad that you are here, and I hope you guys are so ready to hear what she's got to say. Hey there, Ebony. So I am so glad to see you again. Always a pleasure. And I'm really excited to really have my audience get to know you and then also to talk about your book because this looks juicy and delicious. So welcome.
And I'm excited to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, listen, I know that you are really just so established in the HR world. And obviously, I'm not going to say the company that you work for because you're here representing yourself and your expertise. But just know, y'all, it's a big one that she works for. So we're going to love to hear the things that you're going to share with us today. And so with that said, let's talk about imposter syndrome. I feel like whenever I have an HR person, we got to at least start there because it's such a question that always comes up. And I know for me, when I'm on the speaking circuit, a lot of times, especially when I'm talking to women or female groups, the question about imposter syndrome comes up. So since you are an HR expert, let me ask you this. What exactly, in your opinion, is imposter syndrome? Let's just kind of set the scene first.
So for me, in my experience, imposter syndrome is just a lot of self-doubt that you don't think that you belong in the role that you've earned, in the room that you're in, or that you are not as competitive or as valuable as the others sitting in the room. And that's just not true. We have to work really hard to combat that self-doubt. We have to win the battle between our own ears about where we are on our journey.
I love that. I love that. So now, you know what? I like that what you just said, because a lot of times people think of imposter syndrome like, oh, well, that's a you problem, right? But there is a ripple effect for the organization as well when people are struggling with imposter syndrome, especially if the organization's choosing not to address it. Would you say that that's right? Or okay, so in your opinion, tell me a little bit about what does it cost a company when there's imposter syndrome kind of floating around throughout the building and organization?
Oh, so it's a huge cost. It's to the person's morale, to the environment, and it can manifest itself in a tangible way because people are not applying for opportunities. They're not speaking up in meetings, so we're missing really great ideas. Innovation can happen, and so I really hope that leadership creates a space so that everyone can be heard.
And so what would you recommend for leaders, whether it's department leaders or company leaders? How do they create a space where people can be heard? Like what are some of the steps that they can do? Because here's what I will say. Most leaders think that their crushing it, right? And we know that that's not necessarily true. And so to give them an idea of things that they can do so that when you rattle off a couple of examples, they can either think, oh, that could be helpful, or, oh, I'm doing that. That's great. It's confirming that I am actually crushing it, right? So I don't know, in your opinion, what are 2 to 3 things that companies can do or leaders can do to set up their organization or their department so that the imposter syndrome is not eliminated, but minimized?
Yes. So there's a couple things, and this is how I coach my leaders, especially when you're looking at high performers and your talent planning and you have these one-on-one conversations, you really learn your people. So you have to read the room. You know who are your dominant leaders who's always going to speak out in meetings, and you have to create space to say, "Hey, Stephanie, is there anything you want to share?" Or earlier we talked about a great idea. You want to share that here? Give them the floor so that they can be heard. But also individually, you have to create your allies so that you go into the meeting and you know, I'm going to have somebody in my amen corner, right? I'm going to have someone help me support it and get it across the line. Other things are some people are just natural born introverts, right? And so, how do you help them with that? How do you get them to, have the influence amongst their peers so that they don't feel like that?
Yeah, yeah. That's really good. And that's so important because, when I think of having a team that is diverse, right? And a lot of times we think of diversity in the things that we can see, right? So whether it's
Yeah.
generation, gender, race, what have you. But there's things that we can't see that also contribute to diversity, right? Having a diverse team. And one of those is exactly what you just said, introverts. Right. So, we've got introverts, extroverts, we've got different communication styles, different thought process, what have you. And so you're right, as a leader or even as an organization, it's important that we set up our I don't know, departments or meetings or whatever so that every voice has an opportunity to be expressed and heard, right? And I think that it's easy when you've got a team full of people. And this is a challenge I had to deal with just as my own, when I was leading teams. I'm
Yeah.
outspoken, I'm charismatic, I've, got a lot of energy. And so by default, a lot of my team members are very similar to me, right? But the ones that I can learn a lot from and contribute a different aspect to the team are usually the ones who are not like me, i.e., the introverts, right? And they're a little bit more quiet. And so I had to learn over the years to give them a platform and allow them to speak, whenever they felt comfortable enough to speak or what have you. Because there was a point in my younger career as I was coming up the ranks that if you didn't talk up in a meeting, I just saw that as a you issue, right? But that's not true. It's also a leadership issue. And so I needed to take some responsibility and accountability to create that space where everybody felt like they were safe enough to share their thoughts and opinions and whatnot. So I'm glad that you touched on the introverts because sometimes we tend to forget about them, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, it's some people like yourself that are crushing it that often experiences imposter syndrome because you just don't get promoted and it goes out the door. It comes over time. I always use the analogy like a baby starting to go to daycare. They always get sick, right? That's their imposter syndrome creeping in. And then you build an immunity against it. And so as you have wins and you achieve things in your world and you're promoted and you stop taking account of all your mistakes and really look at all your significant results, that's the confidence it's building. And that's how you overcome or crush your imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that is so good. It's almost like say that louder for the people in the back because I think a lot of times people do think, oh, the higher you get, the like it just goes away. It doesn't go away. Different level, different devil. Right now, you got new challenges
Yes.
you've got to deal with, and so you're 100% right. That's, in my opinion, I've always felt the same way, and you just articulated it far better than I ever had. Which is
Oh,
that's how you build your confidence. The more success, and the success doesn't have to be huge and grandiose. It's just little things, right? The little things that you do that's like, oh, I won, or I accomplished that, or I achieved that, or I taught that, or whatever. All those little things add up so that when you do have your moments of doubt, because everybody's got it, then you can look
yes.
back on what you actually have done, right? And let that be until you can get your own confidence going. Let your results be part of that confidence builder, if you will. So I love that. I love that. So I was just going to ask you too, how do you crush imposter syndrome? But you beat me to it. You're like, use confidence as a tool to help, I guess is what you're saying. Is that right?
Well, yes, and I still have it. Sometimes
Mhm.
different situations present themselves, and it could be the smallest little things. My title is just, manager HRBP,
Mhm.
but I'm in the room with SVPs, VPs, and directors daily, constantly. So sometimes, I'm sitting at the table and I am the only African American woman in the room. And sometimes for me, I'm like, okay, wow, I'm doing a good job. And then sometimes it's like, should I jump in here? Should I say something now?
Mhm.
Should I wait? I do partner with a really great SVP. And because we have that relationship now, she will look to Ebony, what do you think? Do you support this? Have you seen something different? So she will flat out ask me, and I've been good lately. And so I have the credibility with my partners, but it was something that I had to earn. I
Mhm.
just didn't get to the table like that. I earned
Yeah,
it.
I love that. And so, you know what? Let's talk about something that you just hit on, which was using your voice, because there's a difference between having a voice and owning
Yeah.
your voice, right?
Yes.
Big difference. And when I listen to people or see, things on social, a lot of times they're using them interchangeably. And it's like, no, no, there's very different things. So, in your opinion, what's the difference between having a voice and owning your voice? So let me start there and then I'll ask my second question. Well, I'll tell you what the
So
second question is so you can lead into it, which is, and what does that look like in corporate?
so having a voice is just having an opinion.
Mhm.
Everybody has a voice and opinion, but what do you say? Does it matter when you speak? Do people stop and listen? Does it influence people differently? And so owning your voice is still being positive, still being a leader, but then also not being afraid of those difficult conversations. And how do you approach that? Right. And so in corporate, it looks like leadership, it looks like influence, it looks like being able to shift the room with your perspective.
Yes, yes. And you know what's interesting? Something that people may not realize is we as leaders actually know who those people are in our on our teams, right? We know who carries influence on the team. And so if you're going to position or present a situation or a change, thing that's going on, a lot of times you will actually let your influencers within the team know, because you know that if they get on board, they're like, okay, it makes sense. Then they're going to drive the rest of the department or the rest of the team on board. And if they're not on board, they have the ability to derail the rest of the department. And it's
Yeah.
not so much about the title as much as about, you're right. There are some people that just are very influential on the team, and they usually don't have the title, actually. It's usually just, and right. And that's the thing that can throw people off. So I always tell leaders, make sure those that are influencing the group, that they're on board and that they're aware and that they understand what it is that you're trying to get accomplished. So I love that. And it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking about having a voice versus owning your voice. I also would add, in addition to what you're saying, there's the having the voice, right? So people say, Ebony, what do you think? And then you say what you think.
Right.
Owning your voice is you saying, because sometimes having a voice, they're the people that will almost be the amen corner, right? They're like, oh, I agree, right? So people are
Yes.
asking their
Yes.
opinion, but they tend to be a safe opinion. But owning your voice could be, you saying, well, actually, I hear what you're saying, but I don't agree. That's owning your voice, right? So having a voice and owning a voice, you're right, are two completely different things. And I really want people to get that. And especially women, because sometimes women struggle with just their voice in general. So
Yeah.
as you're learning to have a voice, that's like step one. But step two, to go even higher, is own your voice, right?
Yes. And when you talk about women in that space, sometimes if we disagree, it's like, are we being labeled, oh, is she confrontational? Or if you disagree, then here's why I disagree, but maybe here's the solution. I could add on to that. Or I like this, but have you thought about that? So it's how you add on to it. And when you do it, always do so in such a positive way so that you know it's going to be received. And one of the things that I try to do, I love a meeting before the meeting if
Yeah.
I'm trying to go in and influence a large group. Because to your point, I know who's going to create some spiral for me. I know who's going to pepper me with questions. So I need to get a few people all in the boat. And so I will do that. Or I'll send a little pre-read. Hey, this is what we plan to discuss. Wanted you to have a little context because then that will minimize some of those questions that may throw you off. Like you're so committed or connected to an idea. It's just easier if people have the context going into what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That's such good advice because a lot of times we're going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting that you get into the meeting and it's actually very, very frustrating when people come to the meeting, they've not read the material, they're not ready for the meeting. And now we're spending this meeting while they're asking questions that they should have already known, right? So that we could get to making decisions in that meeting. And so you doing exactly what you just said, which is doing almost like a pre-meeting. So everybody,
Yes.
nothing's going to shock and awe you in that meeting or surprise you because all you need is one person who can kill your credibility in there because they don't agree or maybe they're just not aware or they haven't been properly briefed. And yeah, that can be really challenging if you're a person who's already struggling to have your voice. Right. So good. So good. So now what advice would you give, Ebony, for someone who is overlooked or maybe overtalked or anything like that? What advice would you give those people on how to overcome that or get better at, again, having the voice, but also owning their voice?
So if you feel like you're overlooked, I always say start with your leader to ask, hey, is there something I'm missing? Is there some skill or competency I can work on? Sometimes, and I've done this years ago, I took like the art of storytelling or leading with data. So that way it helped me present better. The running joke was if you can create a presentation, you can get promoted. And I was like, well, then I need to do that. So sometimes you need to ask your leader what you're missing, right?
Yes.
But then also, if you are consistently in a meeting being talked over or cut off a lot, especially if it's a pattern, if it's with the same person, there is no shame with after the meeting, very gently asking the person, I'm not sure if you noticed this, but I feel that I've been, cut off and I was working to present my idea. I wasn't able to get my words out. But I would never like create a confrontation in front of everyone because that just adds fuels to the fire. If one or two times, someone's always going to get cut off. It just happens. People are passionate about their ideas, they speak up. But if it's consistently every time you talk, you can't complete your sentence because someone's dismissing you, then that needs to be addressed, right?
Exactly. And then let me just go one step further. How would you tell them to address it? Like, because and this is just me being curious because everybody's got a different style. And I think you being an HR professional, you're dealing with all the different styles. And so, how would you recommend somebody actually do that? Because it's easy to say it, but sometimes, and for certain people, it's easier to do, right? But I think I go back to the extra introverts. It sometimes can be a challenge to kind of flex that muscle, if you will. So, are there some
Yeah.
practical steps that you can suggest that they do?
Yeah. So I'll tell you two things.
Mhm.
If it's happening to me, I always lead with grace. I say, I know this not it's not your intent. I know you didn't mean to do this, but this happened a couple times during the meeting. Hopefully going into the next meeting, just how we share our ideas and thoughts that we can just smooth that out so that we're not talking over each other. Right. I always make it like a partnership and I have an onus in it. When I'm the HR in the room and I see it, I always try to have that person, hey, step outside of yourself. Maybe how did you make this person feel? Or I saw when Stephanie was talking, Emma, she shrank a little bit because she couldn't get her words out. And I'm not sure if you noticed that, but you may want to go back and clean that up with her. And I've said that to my leaders, like, I'm not sure if you noticed, but after you kicked down her idea, she didn't say anything else the rest of the meeting, right? And I've
Nice.
had leaders say, you're right. That wasn't my intent. Okay, I'll have a conversation or I'll have her for my one-on-one tomorrow and they're
Mhm.
able to have that conversation. I think we can resolve a lot of corporate issues with the right conversation, but sometimes people are afraid to have the conversation.
Well, you know what? So I love that because, and I'm going to ask you a question because of something that you just said, it's taken me in a different direction, but I love, love, love this so much. I think that right now it's a really interesting time. Listen, engagement scores are down for the most part, right? Employees are just not engaged at work. There's a lot going on. People are overly stressed and there's just a lot going on, right? So when you think of HR specifically, and this is just in general, obviously, I always feel like I actually spoke to a group of CHROs recently at a company brought me in, and they brought in their top CHROs for they sell a product, and so these were some of the top CHROs in the world, and I remember saying to them, "This is your moment. Like this is it. This is we've probably never needed HR like we do now, right?" And so the question becomes, will they rise to the occasion? Because some companies think of HR professionals as compliance, right? You're just going to make sure we don't stay out of trouble. And then some other companies, like like yours, for example, HR is a really valuable piece of the equation. And so when you think of the world that we live in and the employees that are, for the most part, struggling, right? What would you say HR could do? Not again, but I'm talking general, right? What do you think that HR professionals can do to seize this moment that we're in right now? Because a lot of this is just me being intellectually honest. A lot of employees think of HR as more compliance, and therefore they don't really know, like they're not really useful, right? And how can HR people or divisions or CHROs, how can they overcome that? And let me take it one step further. I can tell a lot by an organization based on how much attention the head of HR has in the organization. So you've got the CEO. CEO always has a great relationship, or they should anyway, with their CFO, right? So that makes sense for people. The second relationship, or actually just as equal, should be the relationship that person has with their CHRO, right? If the CEO doesn't have like the CHRO is just more compliance and make sure we stay out of trouble, that's a bad sign, right? But if it's like, oh no, they're just as important as my CFO is the CHRO, then that's a great sign in regards to how that company is going to be working, right? Where is the people part? Are we just saying people are our most valuable asset, or are we actually doing stuff that shows that people are our most valuable asset? So when you think of an organization, obviously you come from a big organization, but what if a lot of my listeners will be founders of smaller organizations? So what are some things that they can do specifically, Ebony, that will help them set their companies up so that HR truly is a business partner and not a leader of compliance?
So, in my experience, and I've worked a couple places,
Hmm.
you have to listen to your employees. You
Yeah.
have to understand what's on the hearts and minds of your employees. As an HR professional, I'm all over survey results,
Mhm.
and I'm action planning with my leaders. What can we influence? What can we change? Some things are really low hanging fruit, some things is on a broader scale, but we have to take the time to listen to our employees, whether you want to do skip level meetings, listening sessions, coffee chats, bonding breaks, whatever you call them, right? There's a million names for them, but you have to listen and then take what you hear and then apply it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's really good because a lot of times people do surveys. Oh, we're going to do a survey, twice a year or whatever. And then they do nothing with the results, right? It's like, then why
I'm
did you
always
bother to
really
ask
proud.
people? Yeah.
I'm always really proud when I can come back the next quarter and share data and see where we've grown or changed. And this is a result of what we did, right? Even
Mhm.
in the department. And I love at the beginning of a year when we say, hey, the company heard you and we've made these changes and they're tangible that people can see, whether it's in policy, time off, different benefit plans, things of that nature. We added a holiday, things of that we can say, this is because of your voice.
Yes, yes, that's powerful. That is so powerful because I don't think employees are asking for a ton, right? They're not asking for the moon. For the most part, back to your point, conversations that connect, being heard, the basic needs of mankind, right, is really what they're looking for. And it's not it doesn't cost a gazillion dollars just to have a conversation, listen, and then report back on what actually I heard you and here's what we're doing, right? So
Exactly.
good stuff. Now let's pull the curtains back a little bit.
Okay.
I want you to share with people what really goes on behind the scenes. Like when HR is together having conversations and employees are not in there other than the HR people, what what is actually being discussed? Like I'll be honest with you. I can tell you from a leadership perspective, behind closed doors, it's a whole different conversation that leaders have than when they open up the doors and now interact with the employees. Completely different conversation, right? I'm assuming HR is probably the same. So
Absolutely.
give us some behind the scenes, some scoop. What are those conversations like behind closed doors from an HR perspective?
I mean, it's very much like leadership. We're talking about how people show up. We talk about what their brand is. We talk about their energy in meetings. We talk about mobility. Do we see them in a role 2 or 3 ahead?
Mhm.
It's all about the talent and succession planning. And not all of that. It's like, oh, they excel in vision and communication and they have executive presence. Sometimes, well, we talk about that too. But sometimes it's really just about my observation and interaction, with leaders.
That's really good. And so, let's actually talk about that because what are some things that people can do, knowing that those are the kind of conversations that are being had behind the scenes, right? You didn't say it this way, but when I hear you, I think of leadership conversations. Yeah, we're talking about Joe Blow. Like, what's up with that attitude, right? Like we're not now doors open. We're going to say it in a different, polished way, and it's going to be very different. But behind closed doors, you're like, what's up with this guy? Why is he here? You know what I mean? Like, you're having a different conversation than most employees would think. And so, what are some things from an HR perspective that employees can do? Because it is about your personal brand. So much is about your personal brand. And I'm so glad you're taking us there because, yes, we need you to be competent, but let's assume you're competent. You know what you're doing at your job. Let's assume the basics are being had and done. If the basics aren't being done, we don't need to have this conversation. But if the basics are being done, so we're going to give people the benefit of the doubt. What are and then some things that they can do to stand out in a positive way, right? That will actually have them surprised, right? Or could get them set up so when positions are being discussed behind closed doors, their name's coming up.
And that's exactly it. People think, oh, I'm hitting all my KPIs. I should automatically be up for that promotion. Well, no, you're kind of rude around the office.
Yeah. Nobody likes you. Yeah.
And you have to be like, it's about the visibility, the influence, the
Yep.
credibility. Are you raising your hands? Are you a
Mhm.
good peer mentor? Let's just start from scratch because I'm in Florida and this is a big one right now in the summertime. Are you dressed appropriately?
Oh,
Right? Put you in front of an audience,
yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, all of those things.
Yep.
It's just it's a common. I don't know why at this in 2026 why people don't know that every interaction is an interview.
Yes.
You
That's
don't
right.
get the job
Mhm.
after I've applied and they said, "Hey, you're talking to Stephanie at 1 o'clock."
Mhm.
I got that job a month ago,
Yes. That's right. That's right.
and people still don't know that.
Yeah, and yet they have to get that piece. They really do. Or there's another saying that I like. I remember having to tell this to one of my employees one time. There's no such thing as after hours. There's no such thing. So in other words, we had a situation. This happened early in my career, and it was it was a function where everybody was invited, and it was kind of like I have drinks after work type of thing. I showed up and then left because I just I didn't even stay for a drink. I just kind of showed up, showed my face, and then I left. Well, the next morning I get called in, Ebony, to the CEO's office, and he was like, "Steph, okay, let me tell you. Here's what happened with one of your employees. She had a little bit too much to drink, and then she kind of trapped me in the corner and told me how much I sucked and how and just
I love
really,
her. I don't know her.
she just let loose on how the company's not doing great and how he is the CEO needs to be better. And so, she's drunk, right? And so she's letting it all loose. So he calls me in to tell me, and I was like mortified, right? Because had I been there, I could have, controlled this thing, but I had left. So, and he goes, "Listen, I don't want you to fire her. There's just let her know there's no such thing as after hours, right?" And so I had to spend some time with her and coach her through that whole thing. But to your point, there are some basics that we just need people to understand, and it goes back to your brand. What does your brand actually represent? And so talk a little bit about that, because you're right. In 2026, you shouldn't be walking in the office with flip-flops on, right? Yeah.
In Florida, it's kind of acceptable, and it's so sad. And so, um, it's so important because here's the thing: no, you may not be the VP, but one day you may have aspirations of getting promoted and doing something different. And it's like my parents always taught you don't dress for the job you have, you dress for the job you want.
Yeah.
Like some of those old sayings are still really relevant, right?
Yes.
And people, it's just the little things. If you go out for a job and unfortunately you don't get it, how you come in the next day is your interview for the next opportunity.
You
People, they don't know that. You can't come in throwing the book bag and you're upset and you're beating on the keyboard and now you're not going to train your counterpart because that's what's talked about.
Yep.
How he didn't have the emotional intelligence. He didn't show himself well afterwards. He's
Mhm.
not a team player anymore. To your point, the attitude, all those things add up. You have to be on all the time. And I wrote down what you said, no such thing as after hours, because people like, oh, we went on a work trip, but then it was after hours. We weren't in the office anymore. You're still in the office from the time you leave your house,
Mhm.
the time you get back. As long as you can use your expense card, your credit card, you're on the clock. I don't care about the
Exactly.
dinner. I don't care who rented the car, who was driving. Do
Yep.
not get in that car and sing the lyrics to the song. It could be offensive to someone. It's so many little hidden rules that people don't
Yep.
tell you, right?
Yes. Mhm.
And I don't like to go to a super lot of corporate outings because
Mhm.
I'm exhausted. But like I'm an extrovert, but then when I'm on all day, it is tiring.
Yep.
And so, but you have to go, you have to show your face, you have to be visible, you don't have to stay long. I tell people, do not, just because it's an open bar, that is not your time to drink.
That's
Get
right.
a drink, nurse it,
Exactly.
nurse it.
Yep, make it a slow
Yeah,
process, you
slow.
know? Yeah, yeah. It's really, yeah, it is that whole after hours thing is unbelievable, and it's unbelievable. I mean, there are times that I'm sure we both got stories where you're like, "What?" You know? Oh my goodness. And so, yeah, and then to your point, you're right. You didn't get the job, figure out, go talk to your leader as to why. Don't go in a combative way, right? But in a way of like, how you can take that information, do better next time for that next interview or that next promotion. And just professional maturity is such a big thing. And a lot of times people they just don't think through the whole thing. And it's like, if there's a reason you didn't get the job, hey, handle it with grace, right? Figure out why, try to do better next time, learn in that process. There was some growth opportunity for you. Take advantage of it, right? Feedback's a gift. So I love that. So listen, I know you've got a whole book on this kind of stuff, but let's talk about your book. And I love the title. Tell me how come you created that title and tell me a little bit about why you wrote the book. And then, of course, tell me a little bit about the book.
So, okay, so many questions. I wrote the book because years ago I was that person. I heard more no's than
Mhm.
a yes that I knew I deserved. So how do I get over that hump? How do I pivot and how do I get to the next opportunity? And so I've had all these experiences. I've been in HR 20 years and I wanted to spill the tea, but I was like, "Ooh, how can I do this in such a tactful way?" And then that was the other thing. I wanted to give people real tools that they can use so they can overcome some of these roadblocks. And so my niece actually helped me. She was like, "What are you trying to do with your purpose?" So she actually helped me name the book. It's T. I'm telling a corporate T, tactics. I give you tools you can use. And then the last part is tenacity. How can I encourage you? And I had to do something with tenacity because my lifetime mentor at this one company I work for, they always ask the question, if there was one word you would use to describe yourself, what would it be? And everybody had all the buzzwords, and I went to him one day. I said, "What is my word? I don't know." He was like, "Tenacious."
Mm.
And I have lived with that, and so I knew tenacity had to be a part of it. So
I love
that's
it.
T, tactics, and tenacity.
Yes, that's so good. And it's so helpful, right? Because again, I think of that's such a great title, by the way, because I think of, yeah, the corporate, there is a lot of tea that gets discussed behind closed doors, in front of closed doors. But then knowing the tactics, like what specifically can I do to put myself in a different position, so on and so forth. And then tenacious, you do have to have tenacity in corporate. Like this is not child's play. And it is just
Yeah.
more intense and more intense. And I do have a concern, and I'd love to get your thought on this. I do have a concern with, we've got 6 generations at work, right? And the way a boomer thinks is not the same way a Gen Z Zoomer thinks. And now we've got the alphas in the workplace, and you've got the millennials, the Gen X's, and the silent generation still working as well. So there's just a lot of dynamics happening. And I am a little concerned, and either tell me I'm wrong and or tell me I'm right, that the some of the generations, I think there's some positives of the younger generation. I think my generation, I'm a Gen X, and the boomers tend to kind of poo-poo on the younger generation sometimes, which is unfair. I think there's a lot that we can learn from the younger generation. But I do think that there's a lot the younger generation can learn from the older generation too, right?
Absolutely.
And so one of the things that's interesting where I say I'm a little concerned is because when I'm out on the speaking circuit and I get to talk to all different types of people in the workforce, what I'm noticing is there's a softness or a lack of tenaciousness, I should say, or tenacity with some of the different generations that I feel like you kind of need that fight, because not everything's going to be rainbows and unicorns or to your liking or making sure you're comfortable and warm and fuzzy. You know what I mean? Sometimes you got to suck it up, cupcake, because this shit's hard, right? So talk to me a little bit about that I fear. I just did a post on this actually, because there's like a social media buzz going on, right? About if you have an insecure boss, basically quit. And my feedback was like, my feedback was like, whoa, right? If you listen, you have one insecure boss, I promise you're going to have a whole slather of other crazy, scenarios as well. And so you can't quit every time something feels uncomfortable, right? Sometimes you got to figure out how to work through it. And so what would you say? Well, first, do you agree or disagree? It's okay to disagree with me and be like, oh, no, I think they're all doing great, right? Because I'm seeing the time that I spend with some of the generations, I'm like, you better figure out how to suck this up, because it ain't going to get easier. Trust me, this is hard, and it gets harder and harder and harder each level you go. You just learn how to adapt to it and how to play that game at that level. And yes, you have to be tenacious so that you don't just have a voice, you own your voice, etc. But what's your take on the different generations, and what advice would you give if you're I'll say a younger generation who's kind of coming into the workforce, or maybe the generations that are trying to move up within the workforce?
And so it's so funny that you asked this, because I'm on the tail end of Gen X. So I do identify with a lot of the millennial things.
Mm-hmm.
I have nieces and nephews that keep me young. So Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I'm always leaning to see what's hip because I want to stay young.
Yeah, right.
But I tell everybody, the quicker you figure it out, the further you will go.
Yes.
A lot of these things, it's not personal. You just have to grow, right? You have to have a tenacious spirit because someone's going to give you correction in love. It is for the benefit of you.
Right.
And some people, they don't know that. And I also say we need everyone. We need Gen X to help Gen Z and Gen Alpha with those communication skills, because we know that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're going to have all of those technical skills. They're already super leaned into AI. Some people in Gen X and even the baby boomers that are still in the workforce, they're a little afraid of AI. So we need everybody collectively to come together. There's something to be learned on both sides of the field. And as long as your leader, like in the workplace, they're not defensive and they're open and you can share. Like right now in the space that I'm in, I have one of the best leaders because she always asks me, what can I do for you? Is there something different? Something I'm doing that I need to do different? And she is so open to that feedback, right? And we're able to have really good, healthy conversations. And I know sometimes everybody doesn't have that in their environment, but that doesn't mean you quit the job, right? Sometimes it's just a temporary feeling, right? And you have to learn how to work through those things, because I think every job, every company has some crazy people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. People are messy.
Yes. So some places are a great place to work, but it's not the only place to work. But you really have to weigh the pros and cons before you just jump ship, or you're going to be the problem and you're going to continue to jump ship.
That's right. And it doesn't look good on your resume when you're always jumping ship because people are like, this person can't even keep a job for a year. You know why? Because somebody hurt your feelings. I
Correct.
mean, that we're
You gotta
done with.
have a little stability
Yeah.
there. But
Yeah.
no one's staying on the job for a long time anyway.
Right.
My father was 30 years in the military, then he worked another 15 years and then retired. No one's doing that anymore,
Nope.
right? But
I agree. I agree. It's so interesting. That's such good advice, though. And so now we're going to put all the places people can get in touch with your book and you, and we'll have all the links there. But just while I have you, how can people get to buy your book, access your book, etc., and how they can find you?
Yes. So first thing is my website. It's www.ebonyruss.com. I also have Instagram, which is ebony.russ_. And all my links are there. Please find me. My book is available on Amazon. I actually have a book and a journal that complements the book, which I'm really happy about. And they're available on Amazon.
I love it. I love it. Well, I can vouch for Ebony. Her credentials are amazing. Her expertise is amazing. And you will be blessed by being able to look at her book, read her book, and write down those tactics and then execute on the tactics as well. So, Ebony, thank you so much for taking time. I know you're a busy lady, so I appreciate you taking time and us having some candid conversation about helping people get further in their career. So thank you so much for your time. It was nice having you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. Thank you. So let us leave you with this reflection. You were not hired to be a smaller version of yourself. And if you're editing who you are just to survive the culture around you, that's worth examining. And if you're a leader, I want you to ask yourself, am I building a culture where people can thrive or just one where they have to learn how to cope and survive? Let me know your thoughts and questions. And tune in next time as we go deeper in Not Like Me. Thank you so much for tuning in to Not Like Me. Listen, if this conversation made you think, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with a colleague or send it to a friend or a loved one. Bring someone else into the conversation. Because growth doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we learn from others, even when they're not like you. I'm Stephanie Chung, and I look forward to seeing you next time.